those of you who are first-timers to this particular series, welcome, welcome. The title of the series, and I don't have an outline for this week because last week it just stressed me out too much. Just have an outline and I'm not doing it. So the title of the series is called Prophets and Prophecy, and it has really evolved out of many years of teaching Tanakh and kind of really wanting to get to know the human beings behind these quote-unquote stick figures. And when I started teaching seniors 7 years ago here at Mayanote, we learned the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, and one of the topics that we learn about is the topic of Navi Sheker, as a false prophet. And that's the point where I started becoming really intrigued on an educational level, like what is this a prophet? You know what? And how can somebody fake prophecy? Right? And I think the best concept that we have of a Navi Sheker, and this is what I tell my students, is Jesus. In other words, Jesus did he knew enough, and the time was still, literate in the books of the prophets enough that he could do a really, really, really good imitation. People forget, or people don't know, Jesus was a Tana. He was a member of the Sanhedrin who was deemed to be a Zaken Mamre, a rebellious sage, and he was kicked out. There is a lot we don't know because it has been excised over time, self-excised, by the way, from both the Mishnah and the Gemara of Avodah Zarah, because it was either, better to take out a word of Torah than have an entire community be burned at the stake. So there are references that are made, and there's some archival stuff that have emerged from the Vatican over the last 80 years that give us glimpses, but the idea is that here this person came along who looked like a Jew, sounded like a Jew, talked like a Jew, but at the end of the day, wasn't. And then, so you have this whole concept of what does it mean to be a prophet, what does it mean to be a man of God, what does it mean to be, later a sage, a teacher, at what point do you differentiate, between the message and the messenger. So where we got up to last week were, I guess, 3 fundamental premises. Fundamental premise number 1 is that prophecy comes from the divine, okay? This is actually the place at which the Rambam Maimonides parts company with Aristotle. Aristotle and many of his fellow philosophers basically feel that once you have perfected the body, the soul, the mind, the active intellect, whatever you want to call it in whatever philosophy class you take, basically once you have purified the vessel will automatically not only be able to hold that whatever it is it's holding, but will hold. Whereas the Rambam, and we see this over and over and over again, and we're going to look at it more today, Nevuah, prophecy, is something that comes from the divine because the divine wants it to come, right? The divine initiates, almost always. It's very, very rare. Next week we'll talk about, not next week, in 2 weeks we'll talk about Moshe. And this is something that Maimonides will talk about today. The only prophet that could really initiate a conversation was Moshe. Moshe's his own category. We're going to put Moshe aside because he's the exception to the rule. So it had to come from the divine. However, God created humans, what does it mean, in his image, in such a way that we have a piece of that divine in us. That piece of the divine is a soul. That piece of the divine is the ability to think abstractly, which is one of the things that separates us from animals. In other words, animals, intelligent animals, and even not so intelligent animals, can think. Okay? It's not that they can't think. I saw a video, I don't know, it made the rounds on YouTube, but it was fascinating because it was a turtle in a zoo, I think in Thailand. I don't know, who saw this or not. There was a big turtle, like a tortoise, flipped over on its back. Now, you saw it, okay? Now, a tortoise flipped over on its back will die in about 10 minutes because basically the gravitational force on its underbelly will basically crush its lungs. So you see this huge thing on its back, and then you see another tortoise. Now, we're talking turtles here. We're talking reptiles. Their brains are about this big. These are not higher order mammals. We're not talking chimps. We're not even talking raccoons or dogs. Okay, nothing personal to Zach. Yes, he's smart, but
Our dog.
okay. Dogs are actually very, very intelligent, and dogs have about the intelligence of a 2-year-old. And if you stop to think about it, 2-year-olds are pretty smart. They can get into cabinets where those potato chips are. So you saw the tortoise, and this second tortoise was standing like upright, and very intentionally, the tortoise slowly walked over to the one that was on its back, stuck its head underneath the shell, and levered the other tortoise, kept pushing until that tortoise flipped back onto its front, and then they both walked away. It was amazing to watch because I've seen these videos of birds building nests, right? I love nature videos. I grew up on Mutual of Omaha. Am I really dating myself here? This is Marlon Perkins, right?
Yeah.
Right? Mutual of Omaha, right, okay. So anyway, I really do love nature videos, and I believe very strongly in the words of David Melech that, we come to recognize God's greatness by looking at the greatness of his creations, which is nature. So I'm sure you've all seen birds building nests and all these animals doing things that they are instinctually programmed to do. This is the first time I've ever seen a reptile clearly reacting to a new situation in a very intentional way. What differentiates humans from everything else is that we have the capacity to think about things that aren't real. Piaget calls it abstract thought, Plato calls it formal thought. We can imagine, and the Rambam, we're going to talk about this, when he talks about imagination. Imagination is not fantasy, but the imagination is the ability to conceptualize in our minds something that isn't concrete. Okay? So the whole world of physics is based on that idea. This whole Higgs boson thing that they've been looking for 50 years and spent $2 billion on a machine that broke. Can you imagine spending $2 billion on a machine that breaks? Okay, but they fixed it. Nobody has seen this Higgs boson thing, okay? Nobody has seen an atom, nobody has seen an electron, and yet our entire system of chemistry and physics is based on these things that we have evidence of existing, but we can't actually see. Think about that, right? Try to convince your 2-year-old that there is a cookie in that cabinet without showing that 2-year-old or letting him smell the cookie. They're going to think, Mommy, you're lying. There's no cookie, there's a door. Right? So that's what humans can do. The ultimate end of that process is the process by which we can not only imagine the divine, but connect with the divine. That's what happened when Adam Harishon and his mate were created, was that, and that's what Gerald Schroeder refers to as Homo sapien sapien. That's the difference between the Cro-Magnon man and the Neanderthal man, and even, what you would call quote-unquote primitive man, who was really good at, planting things and farming things and hunting and gathering and surviving really long winters. But this new evolution of being, right, is something qualitatively different, which is why the Torah uses the word bara, creates. That communication between the mortal coil, right, the material human, and the completely immaterial, is that the right word? Non-material? Immaterial has a different connotation. non-material. Divine is metaphorically described as speech, hearing, vision. Okay? It is something that is described in sensory terms, but it's really a super sensory thing that happens. Okay? So what I want to do is I want to start with really the first description that we have in the Torah of a non-working prophet receiving prophecy. By non-working prophet, I mean not Moshe, not Abraham. Okay, so for those of you who have Tanachim, and even for those of you who don't, and if people can share, that would be great. If you open up to Sefer Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, chapter 11. It's one of the many times when Moshe quits, many times that God doesn't let him quit. And we're going to talk about next week, when we talk about Moshe, why Nevi'im want to quit. Actually, why Nevi'im don't want the job in the first place. It is really a lousy job. So in chapter 11, in Perek Yud Aleph, okay, Bnei Yisrael, Shach and Awe are complaining.
All sophomores to the NPR, please.
Bnei Yisrael are complaining. This time they're complaining really obnoxiously as opposed to just whining. They're getting cantankerous, and they once again want to go back to Egypt, and they're complaining for meat, and they're trash talking the mun, and and Moshe says, forget it. Clearly, I'm doing a bad job because my class is misbehaving. Could you please fire me and find somebody else, because I just can't handle this responsibility anymore. So in verse 15, in Pasuk Tevav, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, and Hashem says to Moshe, Asfali shivim ish, gather for me 70 men, okay, meaning men of importance. Anytime you have this word referring to individuals, it's of status. Miziknei Israel, from the elders of Israel. Asher yadata, ki heim ziknei ha'am, okay, that you know that they are elders, not when it says that you know that they are elders of the nation, it doesn't just mean chronologically old, but they are people who are esteemed as wise old people. The asfali, and gather them, v'shotrim, v'lakachta otam el ohel mo'ed, right? You take them to the ohel mo'ed, v'hityatzvu sham imach, and they're going to stand at attention there with you. Okay, so basically we know the Ohel Moed was that central spot where Moshe communicated to God. It's like, okay, principal says to teacher, do me a favor, go get your students, go get me a group of really good teachers and come to the door of the principal's office. Okay, come to the Ohel Moed. And what Hashem says, and this is what I'm going to do. The Yaradati, I'm in verse Yud Zayin 17. The Yaradati v'dibarti ima. I'm going to come down and I'm going to speak to you, Sham. Ve'atzalti min haruach asher alecha, and I will transfer, is probably I don't know what translation you guys have in front of you, but transfer, it's not really remove, because the analogy is of lighting one flame from another flame. Right, the first flame doesn't lessen, but I will transfer min haruach, from your spirit to them, and then they'll be able to receive prophecy also. So basically, we see really clearly that the process of getting prophecy is something that comes from God, and it's a conscious process, conscious on God's part. It's not an accident. When people get nevuah, it's because God allows it. And in this case, what's happening is that God literally is taking some of Moshe's nevuah and putting it into each one of the zucchini. But then something really odd happens, and this is later on in the chapter, in verse 26. Vayisharu shnei anashim b'machana, and two men remained in the camp. Shem ha'echad Eldad v'shem hasheni Medad. Okay, their names were Eldad and Medad. V'tanach aleihem haruach, and the same spirit of Moshe rested on them. In other words, this is not a geographically bound thing. You can't say it's the force of the Ohel Moed, because these people weren't in the Ohel Moed. Vehem b'ktuvim, and they were on the list. V'lo yatzu ha'ohela, but they did not go to the Ohel Moed. Vayitnabu b'machaneh, and they had nevuah in the camp. And there's a fascinating machloket here that's brought down in Rashi, which I didn't provide for you, but basically, was it a good thing? Does it reflect well on them that they stayed behind, or does it reflect poorly on them that they stayed behind? Because what the Gemara describes is that, well, how are you going to get 70 amongst 12 tribes, right? It doesn't divvy up equally. So what Moshe did was he wrote lots, 72 lots. On 70 of them, there were X's, and on 2 of them, there were blanks. So the 2 people who drew blanks didn't join with the other 70. So one opinion in the Gemara says that Eldad and Medad, what does it mean that they were on the list? They actually drew X's, but because of their modesty and their goodness, they didn't want to embarrass the 2 people who drew blanks, so they stayed behind, and as a reward, God gave them prophecy. The other opinion says is that no, that these were the 2 that drew blanks, but because they were still entitled to some level of prophecy, right? They were Zakanim that Moshe had chosen, so Hashem gave them the prophecy in the camp, which was not public, but at least they personally got the benefit of this nevuah. So they didn't quite match up to the other 70, because in the Torah and in the Tanakh, lots are not coincidences. They are very much divinely guided. Go read your books on Purim, which is next week. That whole idea, there is no coincidence, that's a different set of classes. But Eldad and Medad stay in the camp for either good, bad, whatever, and they get nevuah. Vayaratz hana'ar, and the lad who we're told is Yehoshua. The word na'ar, and this is important to other stories, the word na'ar in the Torah doesn't only mean somebody who's chronologically young, but it can also mean somebody who's in an apprentice position to somebody else. Elisha is referred to as Eliyahu's na'ar. Yosef is referred to a na'ar even at the point when he comes before Paro and he's 30. So the na'ar comes and Vayaratz Leo Vayiged lo Moshe Eldad uMedad mitnab'im b'machaneh. Eldad and Medad are prophesied. Clearly this was a big event. We're going to see how everybody knew in a second that they were prophesying. Vaya'an Yehoshua ben Nun, and then Yehoshua, and the question is asked, if it was Yehoshua, then why is it named him here, but didn't name him before? But so he says, the servant of Moshe, and he's been serving Moshe from his youth. Vayomer Adoni Moshe Klaim. And he said, Moshe, you should, and there's a machloket here, either kill them or at least shut them up or out, shut them in. Okay, imprison them. So this prophesizing was seen as something potentially rebellious and traitorous. Prophecy was not viewed as something universally good. It kind of was like white magic and black magic. It had a dark side. And the Gemara steps in here and says that the words that were coming out of their mouths was that Moshe was going to die and Yehoshua was going to take over, which Yehoshua saw as traitor talk, and Moshe probably realized was real. And Moshe has a really interesting response. And it says, Moshe says, Vayomer Moshe in verse 29, Hamikaneh atali, are you zealous for me? Umi yitem kol am Hashem nevi'im. And who would give that? Would that the whole nation of God would be prophets. Ki yitem Hashem et rucho alehem. that Hashem will give his spirit upon them. So, like, if there's ever any doubt where prophecy comes from, these psukim tell us very clearly where they come from. Okay, what I'd like to do now is go through, this is the Rambam, Maimonides. Again, my apologies for those people who cannot read Hebrew, I couldn't find English on the internet. I know it's there, but sometimes it's a real pain to track it down.
I'm happy for you to translate for me.
Okay. I imagine you're not the only one, so don't worry about it. So the Rambam, and this is, to me, this is so amazing. For the Rambam, and remember, the Rambam Maimonides was a rationalist. He was Aristotle's biggest disciple. The only difference between the Rambam and Aristotle is that the Rambam believed in God and everything that comes along with that, and Aristotle didn't. And that one difference between the Rambam and Aristotle is what makes the Rambam religious, but that subtlety of difference is what made the Rambam be in Cherem for 500 years. Like, it's really weird for us to think in contemporary post-Rav Soloveitchik times, in 21st century Western thought, because to us Maimonides is like God, right? Maimonides is really that core of Torah Umada, of West and Western culture, so to speak, or rationalism and medicine and science and everything, and Torah. For about 500 years, nobody knew about the Rambam. Certainly not in the Ashkenazic world, because he was in Cherem. His books were banned. His books were publicly burned, like the Talmud was publicly burned by the Christians. It's really hard for us to imagine in this day and age. But be that as it may, the Rambam had some basic tenets, which we find in many different forms. The most common form that we find it is the 13 animaments, right? The 13 tenets of our faith. Now, these tenets are found in his first book of Halacha, Hilchot Yesodei HaTorah, the laws of the foundation of the Torah, is the very first book of his entire Yad HaChazakah, the entire Mishnah Torah. Like, this, whatever's in here, like his very first mitzvah, is one has to know that there is a God. Like, so these are really, in this Sefer of Halacha, these are the sine qua nons of the, like, a priori's. Marcia, am I using all these good legal terms? Okay, do I pass the bar?
No.
Okay,
But you're using them okay.
I'm using them appropriately. Good, I'm not going to get sued. Good, excellent. So for the Rambam, for Maimonides, there are certain foundational precepts of belief. And they're not options. They're not suggestions. They're not highfalutin philosophy. They're law. According to the Rambam, it is a command to believe in God. Now, there are plenty who disagree with it. Just like this is not, I don't want you to walk away thinking this is the be-all and end-all, but it's fascinating that, and we're going to go through some of these halachot, that believing in nevuah is a law. It's a halacha. Right? And that's the very first thing that he says in Halacha Aleph. The ones that I circled are the ones that I think are most relevant. That doesn't mean you can't go and read the other ones. But he says, Mi yesodei hadat, the foundations of belief. Leida sheha'el minabe el b'nei hadam, to know. And that's very classic Maimonidean language, is to know. This is for Maimonides, to know and to believe are completely interchangeable. And the Malbim and the Chamalebowitz explain this, but to know that God speaks prophetically to humans, ve'ein ha-nevuah chala ela al chacham gadol b'chochma, and nevuah does not settle on or come to somebody unless he is chacham gadol, that he is very wise in wisdom, and by wisdom he means all wisdom. Torah wisdom, natural wisdom, physics, chemistry, metaphysics. In other words, you have to be like kind of one of these Rhodes Scholar types. Gibor b'midotav, not only do you have to be a Rhodes Scholar type, but you have to be somebody who's ethical beyond reproach. He is literally a warrior, a gibor, somebody who's strong in his midot. Velo yihiyeh yitzro mitgaber alav. Okay? And his own yitzer, his own desires, and the Rambam goes to great length to discuss this in the Moreh Nevuchim, which we're going to see in a second. And basically we say, Ezehu gibor hakovesh yitzro, who is truly the one that is strong, the one that can suppress his desires. And by desires here, we're talking about sexual desires, desires for food, desires for drink, desires for watching television, desires for going on Facebook, desires for, no, fine, coffee, okay, sleep, whatever it is, whatever you want to think about, and they're not necessarily vices. When he says yitzra, he's not talking about vices. He's talking about things that human beings, being that they are human, want and desire and crave, and these aren't bad, they just are realities. But the Navi is someone who has worked on himself enough, like you can kind of think of it as a Zen master, a yoga master. If you read through, particularly in Moreh Nevuchim, it really sounds like what a meditation master does. Somebody who completely conquers their desires. Ella, rather, hu mitgaber b'da'ato al yitzro tamid. And what does he use to conquer his desires? He can use his mind. This is somebody who really is the master of cognitive behavioral psychology. Like they can convince themselves of pretty much anything. Okay? Ba'al de'a rechava, also somebody who has wide-ranging knowledge. Nichona ad ma'od, that is incredibly proper. So what this means is that each one of these 70 people met this criteria. That these 70 men that God decided to share Moshe's Nevuah with met these criteria. That there are physical and mental criteria for somebody who ends up getting the job as Navi. And here's what happens, here's a description of what happens when that happens. So, and the Rambam actually quotes it, and I put it in a little square. So if you could turn to the book of Samuel, chapter 11 to 13. Nope, wrong, sorry, I'm in Shoftim. I'll get back to that. Samuel chapter 10. And if you see, I put like a little box around it. And I was so excited when I saw that that the Rambam quoted this, because I had learned this story before I learned this Rambam. So I'm like, oh, cool. Okay, so this is a real. You want to read a weird story? Read the story of how Shaul becomes king. So Bnei Israel want a king. They go to Samuel, to Shmuel. They say, "We want a king." Okay, Samuel was a prophet. We're not even going to talk about Samuel right now. But Samuel was a prophet. And they say, "We want a king." And Samuel gets upset. He says, "What do you mean you want a king? Like, what, I'm not good enough here? Like, hello, I'm a prophet, I'm a judge, I'm a go-between." They're like, "No, we want a king." And then God comes to Samuel and he says, "Okay, look, they're not this isn't about you." I love it. Like, it's already there in the Tanakh. There's truly nothing new. This is not about you, it's about me. They're not rejecting you, the person, they're rejecting me as God. They can't really handle the fact that I am this invisible authority. They need something concrete. They're people, right? One of the same reasons we have a Mishkan and we have Korbanot, at least according to Maimonides. But God concedes to human nature. So God says to Shmuel, okay, this is the man you're going to pick. You're going to pick this man called Shaul. And he is described as a Gibor Chayil. He is described as somebody who is physically strong, but a Gibur Chayil is also somebody who is morally strong, as we see from the Rambam, and also as we see from the criteria that Yitro gives Moshe for a judge. The first thing that he says, they have to be Anshe Chayil, men of strength. And strength is not just physical strength, but strength is integrity and self-control and being able to turn down a bribe and being able to say, I don't care how much money you offer me, I'm not going to do the wrong thing, which we know is not easy. My husband tells a story about Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, the Rav Yashaber's brother, Olav Shalom, that one day Rav Aaron comes into the Beit Midrash and he's smiling. And Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, being a Soloveitchik, didn't smile. Like, if you don't know, the Soloveitchiks just, they don't smile. They just kind of, at least that generation. I don't know how many people of that generation smile, but Soloveitchik certainly did. It's kind of a moral failing to smile. He comes in and he's smiling, and he says to his Talmidim, do you see that I'm smiling? Yes, Rebbe. Do you want to know why I'm smiling? Yes, Rebbe. Like, what are they going to say? No. I'm smiling because somebody just called me and offered me $5,000, and remember, this is like 1975, $5,000 for the yeshiva if I would do X, Y, Z. And X, Y, Z was something that was morally questionable. And I said to him, I will not do it, not for $5,000, not for $500,000, and I slammed down the phone. P.S. Brisk Yeshiva doesn't exist anymore. Okay? But this is that kind of moral caliber that we're demanding. That you can say no to a really hefty contribution if it means compromising your integrity. And so Shaul was this person, and Shaul is also described as a man who was head and shoulders above the rest. Only person who's described that way. And all the Mefarshim say that it doesn't just mean that he's physically head and shoulders, but that he is morally head and shoulders. So Shaul has gotten to this point that the Rambam describes as somebody of physical strength, rectitude, moral strength, tremendous intelligence. Okay? Unfortunately, didn't make a great king. But the only thing that is left is for the divine spirit to be part of him. Because the model of leader really was prophet. The only leaders Bnei Israel had known up until this point were people who literally had the divine imprimatur of authority. Moshe, Yehoshua, and every single one of the Shoftim. Every single one of the Shoftim had episodes of prophecy where basically God came to them and said, tag, you're it. So so this was part and parcel of being a leader, which is kind of odd. This didn't last, by the way. David is the last king with prophecy. God breaks that mold. He says, this doesn't work. We need a division of labor. So, but Shaul has to become a prophet in order to become a king. So this is the description. So I'm in the book of Samuel 1. That's the one that he wrote, as opposed to Samuel 2, which he didn't because he was dead. Jeremiah wrote Samuel 2. So I'm in Samuel 1, Shmuel Aleph, Perek Yud, chapter 10, verse 10. And so it says as follows: Vayavau Sham, and they, meaning Shaul and his little group, Shaul and Hagivata, to the place of Giv'ah, which was probably some town on a hill. V'hinei chevel nevi'im likrato, and there's a group of prophets that are coming to meet him. Okay, now there are two levels of prophet, and the Rambam will talk about this, and we'll read it in the Ramban in a second. There's the prophet who's graduated, and then there's the prophet in training. Okay, these were prophets in training. They're called Bnei Nevi'im. So I send you back to the Rambam. It's Dalet. No, I'm sorry, it's not Dalet. Nevi'im, Evarehem, Hazarim. change, maybe it's chet. Yeah, kol hanevi'im. This it's chet, right? Where there's a little dalet in front of it. Kol hanevi'im ein mitnab'im b'chol eit sheyirtzu. Right? They don't prophesy whenever they want. Ella b'kavanat dato v'yoshvim smechim v'tovim le. Rather, they have to be intending, and they have to be happy. They have to be full. They can't be hungry. Okay? And umibodedin, and they kind of go off by themselves.
Can the hockey team please come to Ms. F's office? Can the hockey team please come to Ms. F's office?
Okay? And so he describes.
Attention, please. Will the Judaic Studies faculty please go to room 127 for its program? And Mrs. Samuels Mechaneket will meet in 217, and Mrs. Blocks will meet in 225.
They know. Okay. So it says, but then in number 9, it says, Eila shehem, those that mivakshim lihit nabeh, to prophesy, hem hanikraim b'nei hanivim. Right, they are called b'nei nevi'im, and even though ve'af al pi shekavanin datam, even though they do all of this physical and mental preparation that they have to do, efshar shetishre shchina alehem ve'efshar shelo tishre. Okay, so they never know if they're going to get prophecy at all, and they don't become permanent professional prophets. They're like paralegals or paraprofessionals, right? They're assistants. They're because at the end of the day, or they're ABD is probably the best analogy, right? Somebody who has everything but they didn't write their dissertations and they don't, haven't jumped through those last hoops to become Dr. XYZ, but that last hoop that they have to go through as a Navi is God's oral exam, and that's uncontrollable. You don't sit before a board. So these prophets, these people who are called Nevi'im, are these prophets in training. These are these people who are studying to become Nevi'im, who are going through all of the meditative and physical processes of becoming a Navi. So Shaul meets up with him, and here's what happens. It says, "Vatitzlach alav ruach Elohim." Okay, somebody who has an English translation, could you give me what does your Jerusalem Bible say is Vatitzlach? Because I've seen many different translations.
And the Spirit of God came upon him.
Came upon him. Does anybody have a different translation? Okay, Titzlach. It is like lahatzliach, right, to succeed, in the sense that it, not just it came, but it like encased him. It's like, imagine like a suit. Like, this sounds very Star Wars-y.
Drama club to the Beit Knesset. Drama club to the Beit Knesset for rehearsal. Thank you.
Yeah. So it comes down upon him, and v'hinei. I'm sorry, yeah. So it comes down upon him. Sorry, I just lost my place. That's what happens when pages turn. Right. So it comes down upon him, and then he starts to prophesy. And it's a really weird scene. And we're going to read in the Rambam about what it looks like when somebody's prophesying. And he says, he starts to prophesy with them. Vayu kol yod'ei me'etmol shel Shaul. Anybody who knew Shaul in the past, Vayiru v'hinei im hanavim niba, and they see him prophesying with these prophets.
Mrs. Samuels Mechaneka group is meeting in room 217, and Mrs. Blocks is meeting in room 225.
Vayomer ha'am ish al re'ehu, and the people said one to his fellow, Mazeh. Okay, what's going on, right? Mazeh leveim Kish. What's going on with Veim Kish? Hagam Shaul b'nevi'im. Is Shaul also amongst the prophets? And this actually became a catchphrase, and it's a catchphrase even till today. It means like when something really bizarre and out of the ordinary happens, Hagam Shaul b'nevi'im, like, whoa, this doesn't make sense, because what the people knew is like, they're Nevi'im, and there are not Nevi'im. And how did they know? So now I took you back to the Rambam. Number Gimel. Okay? What happens? Va'et shetanuach alav haruach, when the Spirit of God actually comes upon him, titarev nafsho b'ma'alat hamalachim hanikreim ishi. His soul, his spirit becomes bound up or enmeshed and kind of woven up to the level of malachim that are called ishim. Okay? Now, ishim is something that is not quite a malach, but is not quite a human. And the fact that this is ishim and we're ish, and that's not coincidental. In other words, it's like these kind of fiery emanations that are all spirit, but manifest still somehow in matter. Like I imagine it like in a Raiders of the Lost Ark film or something, like one of these fireballs, or like was it in Harry Potter, whatever he does with his wand, and then the fire comes out of his wand? I'm not a Harry Potter maven, but that's what ishim are. So, okay, the yahafech leish acher, and he turns into a different ish, a different being. Vayavin b'da'ato she'eno kemot shehaya, and he can cognitively separate from what's happening to his body, and we're going to read in a second what happens to his body. He's cognitively aware something's going on here. It's like having local anesthesia, right? You don't feel the pain, but you know somebody's pulling the tooth out of your mouth, or in my case, like shoving something into my eyeball, cataract lens. Ella shenit Allah al ma'alat she'ar b'nei adam hachachamim, and rather now he knows that he is on a higher level. And then what happens is the Rambam describes that what happens when, here in number Hay, we skip down to number Hay, and all of them, when they get their prophecy, Evarehem miza'azim, their limbs start shaking, V'koach haguf koshel, and your physical, the powers of the body weaken, V'ashtenotehem mitarfot v'tishaer, and all of their physical faculties somehow lessen, like recede. V'tishaer hade'ah pinuya v'havin ma'ashetira, and their minds are free. Right? It's basically you go into a seizure, but it's not an uncontrolled seizure; it's a controlled seizure. So these men, these Nevi'im, right, or these B'nai Nevi'im are coming towards Shaul, and Shaul is struck with this phenomenon. So it's a very visible phenomenon. Like if you were to see somebody walking down the street, to you it would look like this person was having an epileptic fit, right? Their limbs are shaking, they're not able to stand up anymore, so they collapse on the floor. Their eyes are closed. Their mouth, their mouth is open. Their tongue is lodged, hopefully not in the back of their throat. But what makes them not an epileptic is that their brains are completely clear. And I've read accounts of people, both nuns in meditative orders and Zen masters, who describe that sense of, like, your mind is completely clear and your body is somewhere far away.
This is Mr. D. At the stock market game, we'll meet in 119, the computer room, at lunchtime. Anyone who would like to join, is still openings. We don't start the stock market game until Monday, so come if you're interested. Thank you.
You're welcome. You can earn you somebody. So that's why there was such a commotion, because you knew who was a Navi and when they were getting a Nevuah, and then all of a sudden this guy Shaul, who's been this, fine, upstanding, young, strapping cowherd, all of a sudden is getting Nevuah, and it's really weird. But the flip side of this is that this is what it meant when Shaul, it says that a ruach ra'ah entered him. And what the Gemara describes that as is that Shaul knew what it meant to communicate with the divine. And he couldn't do it anymore. It's like the most, the thing that is the most precious to you, whatever that is. You never thought you would get it. Now you got it. You have it for less than 2 years. You know how you got it. You know that you got it. You know now you don't have it, and there's not a darn thing you can do to grab it. I think Dante calls that hell. Right? Or in the Greeks, there's that idea, it wasn't Sisyphus. What was one of the ones that were tortured and like there was something right in front of them, like but they could never reach it. I don't remember which one of the Greeks myths that was. That's torture. That's insanity. Right? And that's why Shaul went mad. That because he saw, and there's actually what's interesting, there's a line in King Lear about madness, which I don't remember anymore, but Mrs. Goldberg will know, about exactly that. It's like you see the divine and then you don't see it anymore, and that's what brings on madness. And that's, by the way, why in the Gemara it talks about how all people who are mad, 1/60 of that madness is prophecy. That kind of edge, that razor-thin edge between the divine and the non-divine. It's like you have that glimpse of the divine. There was a book that was written by a famous journalist who's bipolar. I'm blanking on it. I have it at home and I'm blanking on it. But anyway, she reflected on what it was like when she started taking lithium. And how, before she started taking lithium, she was inspired and she was alive. And many artists and creative people talk about this. And then when she started taking the lithium, she felt dead. And then she would go off the lithium. And she'd have a manic episode. And this is well documented in people, particularly with bipolar disorder, and people who with bipolar disorder who are also creative people, artists, musicians, writers, that they eventually, and this is what she wrote about, she had to make a choice between being sane and being a completely creative human being. Quite a decision to have to make, right? So, and Shaul didn't get to make that decision. And this now is how we can kind of begin to understand why when Bnei Israel were at Har Sinai and they all saw the presence of God, each one according to their ability, why they freaked out. We read this, that Bnei Israel heard the first two commandments, the first two utterances from God, right? Who wouldn't want to hear an utterance from the mouth of God? And then they said, okay, we're done. Like, to us, they seem like babies. Like, what is wrong with you? Well, what is wrong with you is that this is an incredibly terrifying experience if you don't know what it is and if you're not prepared for it. It's like trying to run a marathon without having trained. You can't, or lift 200-pound dead weight. You can't do it. And if you do it, you know it will kill you. That's what prophecy was. And people had a healthy respect and awe and distance. And like, not so much. But they also had respect for prophets. Prophets held tremendous, tremendous respect because everybody knew that just like becoming a neurologist takes how many years of medical school and how many years of post-medical school and by the time you get to be a neurologist, right, you have been doing science for like half your lifetime, if not more. That's when you're starting at age 32 or 3. Right? So when you go to see a neurologist, you know this is somebody at the top of their field. You go to the Princeton Institute for Advanced Studies, you're talking, Stephen Hawking caliber. That's what prophets were. And everybody knew it. And everybody could pick them out. It was instead of wearing scrubs. You just had this prophet look to you. See, this is why I don't have an outline, because I literally got through one Roman numeral in my head. So, okay, I'm gonna stop a couple minutes early so that I can go to this Judaic Studies meeting. What we're gonna do next week is we're gonna talk a little bit more about these B'nai Nevi'im, which are documented, and then also start talking about Moshe and what made Moshe different, and all of that, what that means. Not next week, in 2 weeks, sorry. March, whatever that is.
Well.
Thank you.
So all the 70s that came, they all had Nebuah?
They had it, and according to most opinions, they had it for the rest of their lives. Like, this was part of them being Zakinim, part of them being this leader of B'nai Israel. This was the first smicha, like literal. This was, they received part of Moshe in them. That's why it says Moshe kibel misinai umasra lezakenim, and he passed it, literally passed over a piece of himself into the zakenim. And that's also the whole halachic concept of Torah l'Moshe misinai, that it's not just Moshe's knowledge that got passed down to these elders, but it was a piece of Moshe's soul that got put into them. So that is now what continues on and on and on and on and on, and to some degree gives halachic authority, because the assumption is that when people are making halachic decisions, when they're doing it the way that it should be done, with wisdom and integrity and all of this, that they still have, that's exactly it. They have that little spark of prophecy, that little piece of Moshe still in them. And most of that piece is a cognitive piece, but because we have souls, there is that metaphysical, spiritual piece also. Big responsibility.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great week, have a happy Purim, all of that, good food, good